This is On Assignment. Hello everyone, I'm Imran Siddiqui here with Alex Villarreal. Thank you so much for joining us as we take you on assignment.
Our first stop, Pakistan, where life is tense in the run-up to the national elections.
Then it's off to New York, where 6 months after Hurricane Sandy, one of the city's biggest attractions reopens for business.
The U.S. State Department's annual Human Rights Report is out, the first under Secretary John Kerry.
And we'll check in on a controversial Chinese development project in Burma.
On Assignment starts right now.
On May 11, Pakistan holds its first election in 5 years. Votes there are often marred by violence, and this year is no different, with militants launching deadly attacks on politicians and their supporters.
Now, the election has raised questions about security and the influence of women and the military on the outcome. And as VOA Islamabad correspondent Sharon Bain told On Assignment's Philip Alexio, young Pakistanis are also playing a more important political role. Let's take a look.
It was very interesting speaking to the young people. Something like 100 million are under the age of 29. And, you know, a lot of those are first-time voters. The youth here are beginning to become more politicized. They're internet-savvy youth. They know that what other countries are doing, and they're getting more into the political sort of system. But in the end, what everybody was telling me was they would probably bow down to whatever the elder of their family recommended. In other words, if an elder was saying, well, I think this candidate is probably the best one, that is probably the way that they're going to vote. I don't say that that's across the board. There will be youth who will come out and vote independently. But overall, this is a pretty traditional society.
Now, another significant story in the elections this year, you had mentioned that now this is going to be for the first time in Pakistan's history, 2 women from the highly conservative tribal regions are running for parliament. What's significant about that, and who are they?
There's this whole area of northwestern Pakistan which borders Afghanistan, which is actually called a federally administered tribal area. And this is an area where the Taliban is very strong.
Badam Zari is making history by running for parliament from Pakistan's conservative and Taliban-dominated tribal belt.
I made this decision to serve and help our sisters and mothers in the area. Our area of Bajor is poor and backward. We have problems in the health and education sectors. This is the reason I decided to take part in the election.
Most women in Pakistan's tribal regions rarely leave their homes. Asad Sarwar, the official who received Zari's nomination papers, says her decision is historic in the Taliban-dominated tribal areas.
This woman has broken barriers. This is very courageous. This step will pave the way for other people, especially women.
Women's rights also remain threatened outside the strongly conservative tribal regions. Last year, Taliban militants shot teenage activist Malala Yousafzai for supporting girls' education.
What are people expecting to come out of this election?
I think of the people that I've spoken to, most of them are saying that there's no one party is really going to win a simple majority. So what's going to happen is you're going to get more coalition building within the parliament. You might even get a hung parliament. There are a lot of divisions within parliament, and that could really affect how the country moves forward. Whichever government gets voted in, it has some major problems that it has to face. It's got an economy which is really in trouble. It's got severe problems with lawlessness in different cities and areas. It's got a problem with militants, and it's got a problem with separatists. And these are significant things that they're going to have to address. But the question is, will they be able to, if it is a hung parliament, will they be able to sort of converge and get national interests up on the front burner and really come together to find a solution to those questions? And nobody's quite sure that they will be able to do that.
What is it like for you as a reporter to roam around the country, or at least in Islamabad, and talk to the people? Because I do know people who go home to Pakistan and come back and describe this country, at least parts of it, that are kind of like the wild, wild west. Kidnappings go on, there's lots of violence. Maybe that's a picture that can be painted in certain parts of the country. But from your perspective and where you get to roam around, what's it like?
Well, I think I'm really lucky to be here. I think it's a really, really interesting time to be in Pakistan, and I do enjoy it. I'm pretty free to travel around the main cities. I've been to Lahore, which is a large city to the east, to Karachi in the south, and a little bit to the north. There are areas that are actually out of bounds. You need to get something called a no objection certificate if you want to go there. The violence in Karachi is, as you said, it's a little bit wild. There are kidnappings, short kidnappings, long kidnappings, muggings, political violence. Some of this is really rubbing off onto the elections.
In Karachi, a city known for its political party violence and intimidation, some people are being coerced into joining the political process, says rickshaw driver Mohammed Usman.
I don't want to vote, but you will do anything at gunpoint. What can we do? It forced on us. We are forced to join the rallies too.
The Taliban have threatened 3 parties, all parties which in the past have criticized the Taliban. And those 3 parties have been attacked. I think people are a little bit nervous about the violence.
And again, VOA's Sharon Bain in Islamabad. Imran, you know, it's really such a powerful statement that exercising what so many of us believe to be just such a basic right, this right to vote, can actually cost you your life.
Yeah, and it's important to mention this here, that it's the first time in the history of Pakistani elections that a democratically elected government will pass the baton to another democratically elected government.
It's a big moment for sure.
Yeah, and voting is actually one of the issues addressed in the U.S. State Department's annual reports on global human rights, the first under the new Secretary of State, John Kerry.
Now, Secretary Kerry says the hope embodied by the early days of the Arab Spring has run up against the harsh realities of political transition. I talked about that with our State Department correspondent, Scott Stearns. So, Scott, of course, these country reports that the State Department releases each year, they don't include rankings. But if you could highlight for us maybe one of the countries that was identified as being one of the worst offenders in terms of human rights, and then another country that might have been showing progress.
Sure. Secretary Kerry mentioned China and its repression of Tibetan nationals and the Uyghur minorities as of continuing concern for the United States. On Burma, Secretary Kerry and this report reflect some pretty serious progress. As you know, this is for the calendar year 2012, so the report reflected a lot of the changes that we saw in 2012.
All the reforms.
The emergence of Aung San Suu Kyi and her political party, her election to the National Assembly, the government's loosening of media restrictions. For instance, you know, now there's free press or a freer press in Burma.
Now, I wanted to get to Syria specifically because Kerry had some very strong words on Syria.
You can imagine, you know, what Syrian civilians have gone through or went through in 2012. The complete breakdown of central authority in a lot of areas. There was concern expressed in this human rights report about Syrian civilians who are living in areas that are still under the control of the Bashar al-Assad government in Damascus, but also civilians who are living in areas where there appears to be little control or control by groups that the United States believes are affiliated with al-Qaeda.
And do these countries studied actually pay attention to these reports?
It's hard to say. I mean, some more than others. Some countries do respond to the human rights report. China has really made a point in the last few years of responding oftentimes within the same news cycle to what it expects the United States will say about China. This year, China expressed its own concerns about the human rights situation in the United States.
Right. But the U.S. doesn't evaluate itself in these reports, right? This is strictly looking at the rest of the world.
This is a look at human rights around the world generally compiled by people who work at the embassy in those respective countries. In countries like Iran, where there is no embassy, that work is done more by working with groups and organizations that operate in that country. So it's obviously harder to come up with information about a country where you don't have an embassy.
I wanted to also talk about the timing of the release of this report this year. It was a bit of unfortunate timing in light of the events that took place in Boston with the bombings.
Secretary Kerry, who, as you know, represented Massachusetts for a long time in the United States Senate, so he clearly felt personally the events that were going on in Boston. He said in releasing the report that they had considered delaying the release, but that he felt it was important to go forward because running a marathon without terror or enjoying a holiday without terror is a fundamental human right as well. And so he felt that it was necessary to push forward with that.
How does that apply to the way that the U.S. and diplomats in the U.S. feel in other countries as well?
The feeling is that the United States, I believe, in doing this human rights report, recognizing some of its own human rights shortfalls, that the United States is not perfect, does try to apply this universal standard to allowing or evaluating the freedom that people around the world live in, that space, that sort of space for civil discourse and the ability, as we say, to enjoy a day free of terror. And one of the observations of this human rights report was a shrinking of that space for civil discourse in some countries.
And a little history on this. Congress began requiring the State Department to report on human rights abroad as part of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1961.
We're taking a break now. Coming up, a famous amusement park reopens in New York City. You're watching On Assignment.
Last October, Hurricane Sandy slammed into the eastern United States, severely disrupting life in coastal areas. Now, one of those areas was Coney Island in Brooklyn, New York.
The amusements there have entertained people for over 100 years, but the hurricane sea surge flooded rides and games, and one of the families behind the attractions was forced to rebuild.
VOA's Adam Phillips followed the Verderes family throughout the winter, and he joins us now from New York. And we want to ask Adam a couple questions about your reporting. Adam, what happened to this family business, this family that you covered?
Well, this is a wonderful Greek family, very, very down to earth. Their heart is completely in the business. They've built a lot of the rides themselves, and they maintain them with tools that really date back to the 1920s when the big Wonder Wheel, what most people think of as a Ferris wheel, was built. So they also have that, and they have a thing called a Spookorama, which was kind of a fun horror house with very kind of scary, it was a scary ride where all these scary monsters and other kinds of ghoulish things jump out at people on cars. And the day after, the sea surge almost completely destroyed everything in the spook house, which was mostly handmade, and severely threatened the viability of the Wonder Wheel, among all the kiddie rides and other things that they had in this sort of amusement area within Coney Island.
All right, we'll just take a look at Adam's report and come right back.
For over a century, Coney Island has been known for fun, relaxation, and seaside thrills. But that dreamland turned into a nightmare for the Verderes family on October 29th, when a massive sea surge flooded their rides and games. Their century-old Wonder Wheel and Spook House from 1955 were nearly destroyed.
When we got here and saw the devastation, it was like a death.
Dino Verderes is a third-generation worker in this family-owned business.
I mean, figuratively like a death, because, a lot of this stuff has history.
But the family resolved to rebuild.
Get her done.
Dino worked with a 5-man crew he has known since he was a boy. They assisted his father, co-owner Steve Verderes, who directed the cleanup and restoration.
We're men. We do what we have to do. We get it done.
Steve's brother, Dennis Verderes, handled logistics and finances. He says the family had to borrow a huge amount of money to pay for repairs and new equipment. Still, it's probably safe to say that nowhere have the results been more fun than here.
We love you, Coney!
Adam Phillips, VOA News, New York.
We're back with Adam Phillips in New York. Adam, why did you particularly follow this family? What was so unique about them?
Well, I got to know them a little bit earlier in the summer, just because we were doing a story on Coney Island and how it's still a wonderful place to go for the family and a little bit, carnivalesque. And I just knew that they were in trouble because so many people who were right on the coast there, the Atlantic coast, were flooded. And I just knew they had a lot of heart. They really cared about the business. They really loved the fans. And I just thought that they could stand in for the whole in terms of what it's like when your small business is nearly destroyed.
Absolutely, and Adam, it is great to see them up and running again. VOA's Adam Phillips for us in New York. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thanks, Adam. We're taking a break now. Coming up, a controversial development project for Burma. You're watching On Assignment. Last month, hundreds of people in Burma protested against a China-backed energy pipeline project. Similar protests have erupted at Chinese-funded projects across Burma, forcing Beijing to rethink its development strategy in the country.
Activists say the pipeline has affected fishing and farming and destroyed the environment. VOA's Daniel Scharf reports.
The protest in western Rakhine State was the largest and most organized public opposition to the Burma-China pipeline project. Activists were twice denied a permit to assemble, but demonstrated anyway. Several were arrested. Speaking via Skype, activist One On says there is too much at stake to remain silent.
Such as, the fishing ground we are being restricted, locals are not being getting any adequate compensation or keep losing their livelihood. And as well as the local people did not get any job opportunity, and most other people are being exploited when they are going to work in the Chinese company.
Just a few years ago, protesting in Burma was pretty much not allowed. I mean, if you were on the streets, if you were defying the authorities, you were shut down really quickly and you were thrown in jail. Things have changed, of course. It's now legal to have gatherings as long as you get permission. And what happened with this protest that we had earlier this month on the pipelines was that they had sought permission to protest. That permission was denied not once, at least twice. And so they went ahead with their protest anyway because they felt like they needed to be heard. As a result, there were a few arrests, detentions that happened. They were released on bail from what we understand, but they were also charged with holding an illegal protest. So it remains to be seen exactly what kind of a sentence that they'll pass down.
What exactly are they protesting against? I mean, development brings jobs, brings money into the region.
Well, the main problem that the protesters saw was just the fact that they're not being brought into the actual project. This, of course, was a deal that was made during the previous military government with China. And whenever those kind of deals went down, they just didn't make many details public. And of course, the local people who are the most affected by it, they want to know what exactly is this going to do for us, and what's going to happen to my home? Am I going to have a place to live and so forth? And also a lot of concerns about how some of the pipeline construction would affect fishermen. They're not being allowed to fish in certain areas because of the construction that's going on. Concerns about the environment and what happens if there's a leak. So there's ongoing concerns about this pipeline project, and the locals just feel that they're not going to benefit from it.
Have these protests slowed down the development at all?
Well, in the case of the Myitsone Dam, it of course was slowed down completely. It was suspended until further notice.
Analysts like Ralph Casas, speaking via Skype, say authorities are learning they cannot ignore these protests.
It's a message, it's a wake-up call both for the Burmese government and for the Chinese that they have to sort of take local considerations into effect a little bit more. They need to be more effective in dealing with public relations. I'm sure that they will be. Again, we've already seen the Chinese start to take some positive actions in this regard, and I expect that will continue.
As far as the pipelines go, though, the pipelines are going to be completed sometime in the next month if they stay on schedule. It may take a few more weeks or a few more months than they had anticipated, but it's going to be completed very quickly, and they're expecting to start pumping natural gas as early as the end of May.
Daniel, I just have one more question about your forays into Burma. It was sort of a closed society a few years ago, so are they used to seeing foreigners by now? Are you still kind of looked at a little differently?
Yeah, Burma was very closed off to a large degree, and a lot of the reason behind that was, of course, because the democracy leader, the opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi, had discouraged tourism And so as a result of that, a lot of tourists and businessmen, of course, were concerned about the sanctions that were against economic sanctions against the government. So doing business there was quite difficult. But that has changed dramatically in the last few years to the point now where they don't have enough hotel rooms to actually put up all of the tourists and businessmen who are coming into town.
And our thanks again to VOA correspondent Daniel Scharf. The pipeline to China is expected to earn about $1 billion a year for Burma. China recently overtook the U.S. as the largest energy consumer in the world.
And China's role in another region, Africa, is one of many subjects in the works of Kenyan artist Michael Soy. Soy says he likes to paint things that make his fellow Kenyans uncomfortable. Jill Craig has that story.
As the art scene in Kenya has grown, the works of Michael Soy have become searing depictions of society, including the underworld of strip clubs, prostitution, and police corruption, as well as everyday contradictions in politics and personal lives. Soy says he aims to show life as it really is, and that tends to make people uncomfortable.
It's just because I choose to work on issues that a lot of Kenyan artists choose not to work with. I basically create work that would basically be seen as work that disturbs people.
For example, Soy did a series of paintings on Nairobi strip clubs, in which he says he focuses more on the men's reactions than on the women themselves. He says he likes exposing hypocrisy in society.
It's a community that basically loves to dig a hole and bury your head in the sand and pretend that these things don't happen, but unfortunately they do. Yeah.
Danda Urali-Mek is the founder of the Circle Art Agency. She says that Soy has never been afraid to push conventional limits.
I think up until recently, artists were very uncomfortable about being overtly political. They actually weren't, people were frightened to do that, and I've noticed over the last 5, maybe 7 years that it has become open. But he's still one of the forerunners because, I mean, his work's very humorous and he deliberately makes it understandable because he wants his audience to be local Kenyans who can relate to his work and understand it, as opposed to art being a sort of an elitist thing that only the upper classes can appreciate.
Urali-Mek says Soy's artwork usually amuses passersby. In fact, she recently brought his painting of voting lines during the March elections to a show in Nairobi.
And every single person who walked past that piece laughed their heads off, you know, from the cleaner to the general manager. So I think people treat it with humour, you know. I think it's a humorous thing. But it is a subject people are a bit uncomfortable about talking about.
Issues that make Kenyans squirm are precisely the ones that Soy wants to document for future generations through his artwork.
I'm basically trying to create what I'd want to call a social pictorial diary. You know, I'm just documenting this city, I'm just documenting this country at this particular moment.
And he has no plans to stop documenting these moments anytime soon. Jill Craig for VOA News, Nairobi.
And with that, we've come to the end of our show.
But before we go, a reminder that you can watch On Assignment on YouTube with captions in English and many other languages.
All you have to do is click on CC for closed captions in your YouTube player and adjust your settings.
And next week, we'll introduce you to the winners of the VOA photo contest.
You are not going to want to miss that, so definitely stay tuned. We will see you then.